Good morning. You are looking at a live view from the International Space Station at SpaceX's Dragon resupply spacecraft, connected to the station's Canadarm2 and positioned just outside the station's Harmony module, where it will be berthed shortly. This spacecraft, which is carrying 5,500 pounds of crew supplies, hardware, research, and more, is rounding out its two-day journey to the space station, where it will remain for about a month after this morning's operations. We are live from the International Space Station Flight Control Room at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, where flight controllers are switching between the Orbit 1 and 2 shifts. These teams monitor all of the systems aboard the station, and they're currently controlling the Canadarm2 to bring the Dragon spacecraft up to the station.
Thank you for double checking. They are indeed off.
Leading teams this morning is Flight Director Rick Henfling. Seated in the white shirt to his right is Capcom, or Capsule Communicator, Travis Fitzgerald, who is relaying information from the ground to the astronauts aboard the space station. This morning's visiting vehicle officer is David Harshman. He's in communication with the SpaceX team in Hawthorne, California, keeping tabs on Dragon with information from both teams. And robotics controller is Jared Olson, and his team is controlling the Canadarm2 for today's berthing. You can see that Dragon is positioned close outside the International Space Station's Harmony module and the common berthing mechanism. And over the next several minutes, we'll see Dragon move slowly in through the use of that Canadarm2 until it is attached and secured to the station through a series of locks and bolts. And it will remain there for approximately a month as the crew unloads the research and supplies on board before reloading it and sending it back to Earth for a safe splashdown. Dragon was captured this morning by Canadian Space Agency astronaut David Saint-Jacques and backed up by NASA's Nick Hague, who took their place in the cupola module and used the Canadarm2, as you can see in this time-lapse, to reach out and grapple the spacecraft when it was about 30 feet away from the International Space Station. The astronauts then turned the controls back over to teams on the ground here in Mission Control, and they're now using the Canadarm2 to reposition the spacecraft and bring it into the station's Harmony module. The International Space Station is currently traveling over 17,000 miles an hour and flying 261 statute miles above the South Atlantic Ocean in an orbital daytime. Throughout our coverage, we'll see the space station vary from light to darkness as it crosses over into the night side of the Earth, as the station orbits the Earth about every 90 minutes. The crew on board the station will be preparing for their midday meal coming up, and they have been informed to not exercise any longer, as any exercise might cause vibrations that would disturb the placement of the spacecraft on the Canadarm2. As you can see, we're in a short satellite handover period right now, which occurs from time to time on the International Space Station. The data and communications, including some of the visuals from the station, come through a series of satellites called TDRS, which is the Tracking Data and Relay Satellite System. And these losses of communication are tracked by the teams and are expected to be regained shortly. Dragon began its journey to the International Space Station on Saturday, May the 4th at 1:48 a.m. Central Time when it lifted off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center, Cape Canaveral Air Force Station in Florida. It was the second launch attempt for Dragon, the night before having postponed for a 24-hour hold. And about 12 minutes after Dragon's launch, solar arrays unfurled and began collecting good power, propelling it for its next 2-day journey to the International Space Station, where you see it now, outside of the station's Harmony module. This is SpaceX's 17th commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station, but it's a welcome back for this Dragon capsule, which has visited the station before on commercial resupply mission 12. You may be able to see that Dragon is slowly moving in towards the Harmony module. Teams here on the ground send commands to control the robotic arm, and it will move in very small increments as the teams perform alignment checks along the way. As we mentioned, Dragon will be attached with a series of latches and bolts. The first of those is the series of latches, and to us it will look like Dragon is attached to the station once those have secured the vehicle, but berthing itself will be confirmed after the additional 16 bolts have created an even firmer hold on the spacecraft. Once Dragon is attached to the International Space Station, crews will begin accessing the cargo later today and tomorrow, and will continue unloading the spacecraft over the next several weeks before reloading it with about 4,200 pounds of research hardware and crew supplies to make its way back to Earth. However, before opening those hatches later today, Dragon will be outfitted in the area known as the vestibule, which is the space between Dragon and the station. And that'll prepare the crews to open the hatch. There are 2 hatches, and the crew will need to open those to access the contents. There's a hatch on the station side and a hatch on Dragon itself. As you can see, the arm is now in a hold position. This allows the teams on the ground to make their final alignment checks, preparing for the spacecraft to be berthed to the Harmony module. The first stage of capture or berthing for Dragon is called RTL, ready to latch, and teams on the ground are now preparing for those 4 latches once Dragon is connected to the space station. Dragon moving even slower into its berthing position, where those 4 latches will first secure it to the vehicle. Those latches are now beginning to secure Dragon to the space station. All 4 of those latches have been attached. That's the first stage capture. We'll now look for second stage capture. The Dragon spacecraft you see outside the station's Harmony module today arrives with around 5,500 pounds of total cargo. About 3,300 pounds of that is pressurized, while another 2,100 is unpressurized. And about 1,600 pounds of the cargo, the bulk of the pressurized cargo, is actually science investigations. There's always science going on the International Space Station. It is our orbiting laboratory. Dragon may look like it is attached to the International Space Station, and while we do have that first stage capture, we'll be looking for second stage capture to occur, and that's the driving of 16 bolts to firmly attach Dragon to the International Space Station for its month-long stay. The Canadarm is now limp, which sets it up for the second stage capture to begin shortly. That's that driving of 16 bolts to secure Dragon to the International Space Station. As you can see, the station is now in an orbital nighttime, having recently crossed the terminator line. That's the line between daylight and nighttime as the station orbits the Earth at over 17,000 miles an hour. It's currently over the Indian Ocean and will be coming up to cross Australia shortly. Upon its arrival today, SpaceX's Dragon is the sixth vehicle parked at the space station right now. It joins two Soyuz spacecraft, two Russian Progress resupply crafts, and Northrop Grumman's Cygnus spacecraft. You can see the configuration of those spacecraft on the International Space Station and their parking spots. We've been looking forward to the arrival of Dragon, and we're expecting it a little bit earlier, but on April 29th, teams identified an issue with the main bus switching unit. That's distributes power to 2 of the 8 channels on the station, and there were no concerns to the crew or the station, but it's important that the station has its full power capability when a vehicle arrives, and the Canadarm2 had a backup string of power for Dragon's arrival. This video shows a remove and replace of that MBSU, which occurred over 2 days last week, using the special purpose dexterous manipulator to complete the operation. Station is now in an optimal configuration for the capture and berthing, which is occurring currently. And we're getting word that those 16 bolts, which are the second stage capture, are now beginning to rotate and further attach Dragon to the space station. The 16 bolts that are turning now are referred to as A bolts, which stands for acquired bolts. And once they are attached, it will secure Dragon, and that will conclude today's operations. We're continuing to monitor the berthing of the Dragon resupply craft to the International Space Station. Dragon was captured this morning at 6:03 a.m. Central Time by Canada's David Saint-Jacques. And important to note, David is actually the first Canadian Space Agency astronaut to use the Canadarm2 to capture a vehicle.
Station Houston, SpaceX Ground 2, no response required, but the exercise constraints are lifted. Feel free to exercise.
And now those 16 bolts have finished driving into Dragon, firmly securing it to the Harmony module on board the International Space Station and concluding the berthing process. This wraps up Dragon's 2-day journey after it launched on May 4th and arrived this morning being captured by Canadian Space Agency astronaut David Saint-Jacques. Ground teams then used the Canadarm2 to berth the Dragon to the International Space Station at 8:32 a.m. Central Time, as the station was flying about 254 statute miles over Australia. Now that Dragon is attached to the International Space Station, it will remain on board for about a month, and the crew will begin to open the hatch later this afternoon. They'll spend the next few weeks unloading the cargo before reloading it with about 4,200 pounds of research hardware and crew supplies, and sending that back to Earth for a safe splashdown. That wraps up our coverage for this morning's Dragon mission, SpaceX's 17th commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station. Thank you for joining us live from the International Space Station Flight Control Room. This is Mission Control Houston.